Happy Wednesday, economics students. I'm recording this before I received your test back. I hope everybody did well on it. It's a different format for us, taking theoretical and real life problems and then applying the principles we've been learning to solve those problems and give your what you know and even in some places your opinions of what things will be happening. So I hope you found it challenging. I think it's appropriate for this online education we're doing where we have open books and open notes. So before we go into our next section of economics, here's something you might find interesting and maybe even a little frightening, and it's this. According to McKinsey and Company, which is one of the world's leading consulting firms, as many as 800 million people could lose their jobs in the coming decade thanks to automation and robotics and artificial intelligence. That's the equivalent of about a fifth of the total global workforce. So we're talking a lot of people here. McKinsey looked at 46 countries, mainly developed countries, and some 800 occupations to come up with their conclusions. And they said, on the whole, the benefits of artificial intelligence and robotics and things like that will be positive. But on the other hand, all these people are going to lose their jobs. So what does that mean? So they looked at computer vision, natural language, virtual assistants, robotic process automation, and advanced machine learning. And they said those are the things that are coming up. What are going away are jobs such as fast food workers, back office employees, which are people doing accounting and maybe billing and processing of invoices and things like that. And those are the people who are going to be affected. Even automation could take over things such as journalism, where right now there are computers that are actually writing news stories. The data goes in, automatically out pops a news story with the who, what, when, where, why, and how all plugged into it. So these computers are getting up there. The good news, McKinsey says, is that people will be placed into new jobs. So 800 million will lose their jobs, but if 850 million new jobs are created, according to our BHEP, that's a good thing, right? But what it will mean is that people are going to have to learn new skills. And some of those areas they see will be in demand are healthcare providing for the aging population, such as me when that time comes, technology specialists, and even jobs such as gardeners and service industry jobs will be growing in the future. Well, Dr. S would say that economic incentives and constraints will accomplish these changes in a market-based or price-based economy. So higher pay in one segment and unemployment in another segment will help accomplish. It'll move people automatically to these jobs. And that's just how the free economies work. It's our BHEP number 21. Now, this doesn't work in command economies and totalitarian systems, anywhere you have central control, because workers can be forced to go certain places, even live certain places. And as we know, they will not allocate their scarce resources efficiently because they're not using the incentives of the free market, of prices to move stuff around, to do it efficiently. Which brings us to BHEP number 22. Are you ready for it? And it's a simple one. It is this. The only thing that can reduce poverty is the creation of more wealth. I'll repeat. The only thing that can reduce poverty is the creation of more wealth. Okay, pretty simple. But why is that? The whole point of this BHEP is that taking from one class of people and giving it to another class of people does not reduce poverty. It's been proven time and again, you can't tax your way to wealth. You have to create more wealth, and then it gets distributed through the economy. We've seen over time that there's never been a system where the taking from the one group and giving to the other group has helped to create a prosperous society. What reduces poverty over time is the creation of more wealth, more goods and services, more stuff, more things for people to do, more ways for people to learn. And this has been proven just recently being the last 30, 40 years in places like India and China. When they relaxed their command economy, they created more wealth, and bingo, hundreds of millions of people have risen from poverty into middle class and sometimes beyond, sometimes way beyond. And the reason why? The pie has gotten bigger. Okay, wealth is not a zero-sum game. Economics is not a zero-sum game. I hope you put that in one of your answers when we were talking about in our test. So to reduce poverty, establish a growing economy, which means more goods and services, and you have your best bet of reducing poverty. Okay, good. So that brings us to our next section of study, which is the national economy. We are skipping over entire sections of the book because we need to get through to these areas that I had to make some calls in. I think this next area is more important than some of the ones we're skipping. So we're skipping over investments, speculation, risk, and insurance. We just don't have the time doing this in one semester to cover those. I encourage you to go back and read those sections. They're certainly very good. But we're going to jump right through to chapters 15 through 18, collectively called the national economy. So we'll study the national output, which is GDP and aggregate demand. We'll study money and banking and why both are essential to having a strong economy, why a banking system and why a strong currency is essential if you want to have a prosperous economy. We'll look at government functions. The government, as we know, is a major factor in all economies. We'll learn what its proper functions are and how it can mess up the efficient allocation of strat-thou, scarce resources that have alternative uses. And then we're going to look at government finance. And this is really appropriate for now because we just saw in the last week our government create $2 trillion to hand out because of the virus. So somewhere $2 trillion has been created and is going to be, they say, distributed through the system. Well, where did this money come from? How do they get $2 trillion out of nowhere? Oh, and what is $1 trillion? We'll look at that in a second. It's an amazing section. There's a lot to cover. So let's just do a brief introduction. So Dr. Soll opens this chapter with a discussion of the Great Depression. So the Great Depression, I'm sure you've studied it by now. It started in 1929 and ran through 1941. World War II is kind of credited with getting the U.S. out of the Depression. Now the Depression is fascinating, if a little depressing, but why does Dr. Soll start with the Great Depression? Well, he wants to show us how aggregate demand can influence not only our economy, but the global economy. And as Dr. Soll says, the Great Depression, its effects are even being felt today. My parents lived through it. There's plenty of people who are alive today who remember what that was like. So let's just go through that real quick. First of all, what is aggregate demand? Okay, he talks about that. You'll see it in your reading for Thursday. Aggregate demand is the sum of all final goods and services produced in an economy, expressed as the total amount of money exchanged for those goods and services. So aggregate demand is the sum of all final goods and services produced in an economy, expressed as the total amount of money exchanged for those goods and services. And interestingly enough, it's the same as GDP, which I've been talking about, gross domestic product. Okay, so with that, let's go in and just really quickly summarize the Great Depression. It began with the stock market crash of 1929. There was a lot of just rampant speculation going on. Money was doubling. People were buying crazy stuff. And what happened? That just fell off a cliff. And that led to bank panics in the early 1930s. And we don't see this today, but they had these things called runs on banks. And that's when people show up demanding to have their money back from the bank. And they fear there's not enough money in the bank, so they lined up and they would limit how much money you could withdraw, and you couldn't get all your money. And if you were last in line, you might not get any of your money. Banks failed. They didn't have enough money to pay back all their depositors. That led to the money supply, the total amount of money available, contracting by 30%. And that had disastrous results. Prices plunged. There just wasn't the money around to buy any goods. Employment went up to 25%. Today we're at 4.5%. We were at 3.5% prior to COVID. We're 4.5%. We're probably going to, I'm going to guess 6, 7, 8% with COVID, but that'll be a short-term blip, we hope. The economy shrunk by 25% in just 3 years. That's how disastrous this was. Industrial production plummeted, unemployment soared, families suffered, marriage failed, um, debt got increased, everything just went wrong. Banks and firms and individuals went into bankruptcy. People lost their farms and businesses and homes. And it began in the United States and spread throughout the globe. It was the longest and certainly the deepest downturn in the history of the United States and in any modern industrial economy. And here's an interesting thing, and we're going to study banks, and we'll study the Federal Reserve Bank, which is the central bank for our economy. In 2002, Ben Bernanke, who was the head of the Fed, he acknowledged publicly what economists such as Dr. Solow have known for a long time, and that's the Federal Reserve's mistakes contributed for the biggest economic disaster in world history. And their most serious sin, they failed to stem the decline of money. The Federal Reserve could have prevented the deflation by putting more money into the system to counteract the collapse of the banks, but it failed to do so. In fact, it did the opposite. Remember we talk about government, sometimes they don't do the right thing and almost rarely do the right thing? This is one of it. They even raised interest rates in the face of all this. And then FDR compounded the errors by putting tariffs on almost everything coming into this country, starting a trade war with the rest of the world, and global trade plummeted by something like 75%. It basically ended. So yikes, this was a very difficult time. Okay, that's just a quick thumbnail of the Depression. When we start talking about the national economy, we get into huge numbers. Millions, billions, and even trillions. So I want to take the rest of today and let's just visualize what this means when we use these numbers, because it's really hard to visualize what $1 billion is, let alone $1 trillion. So let me do some show and tell here. Okay, this is a $100 bill. There's Franklin on there. Okay, and this is what $10,000 in hundreds would look like. Okay, $10,000, yep, buy a car, do some nice stuff with that. And the next one, here's 100 piles of 10,000 right there. Okay, let's see that guy, there he is. Yep, he's rich, he's got $1 million. It would fit into a grocery bag. Now we're talking serious money. Let's look at what $100 million looks like. Ha-ha, it'll fit on a pallet. So we need a forklift to take our $100 million. We've probably seen videos of drug dealers down in Colombia with pallets full of money. That's what $100 million would look like on a pallet. Now, we talked about billionaires. We talked about how much Bezos is worth. This is $1 billion. Okay, there's a guy over there. So that's what, 10 pallets. That would be kind of difficult to haul down to the Publix, but that's $1 billion. And now, let's look at $1 trillion. There is $1 trillion, and you can see right down here, that's our guy standing there. So look at it, it's double stacked with pallets. That's what $1 trillion looks like. See that little guy down there? So our government just created, out of nowhere, $2 trillion, twice this, for the COVID relief. Okay, that just gives you some idea of the scope of what we're talking about. I'll show you those when we get back live, because it's better to see them on a big screen, but that gives you some idea. Okay, well, good luck with the reading, and we will check in with you for another video toward the end of the week.